Hello and welcome to the Russian Empire History Podcast, the history of all the peoples of the Russian Empire. I'm your host, J.P. Bristow, and this is Season 1, The Forest, the Steppe and the Birth of the Russian Empire, and Episode 80, Dmitry, Andrey and Nogay. After covering the Horde in the last few episodes, we can now move into covering the Rus and Mongols together. We've seen the Rus experience under the Mongols during a period in which, notwithstanding the difficulties with the imperial succession and the war with the Ilkhans, the Great Horde has been united under strong leaders. It has consistently grown bigger, stronger and wealthier, and made considerable efforts to establish secure and stable rule over its conquered peoples. It should not be any real surprise to us that the Rus were unable to put up any significant resistance during this time. After the death of Alexander Nevsky, Suzdalia continues its fragmentation, and resistance becomes even more far-fetched. As we enter the last 2 decades of the 13th century, the Horde begins to suffer internal problems itself. After the death of Möngke Timur, his brother Tode Möngke becomes Khan, but the unity of the Great Horde begins to break down for all the same reasons the Great Mongol Empire had broken down a couple of decades previously. Nogay, who could not claim the Khan's throne for himself as he came from the wrong branch of the family, was not content under Tode Möngke as he had been under Möngke Timur. And he was not the only one. The dissatisfaction spread, and Tode Möngke was forced first to delegate to his nephew, Tulabuga or Telobuga in the Russian chronicles, and then to abdicate in his favour. This set off a period of instability in the Horde that will last through to the end of the century. But the Rus were unable to take any advantage of Mongol disarray. Just as we saw in southern Rus a century earlier, the knyazes locked into increasingly petty fighting over fragmenting knyazhestva that steadily got smaller and weaker. They pursued only their own interests. There was no evidence of any awareness of common interest or identity, no efforts to unify or strengthen their domains, or any consideration for the welfare of their subjects. For several years after the death of Vasily, the chronicles tell us nothing about what the knyazes are doing. It seems that Alexander Nevsky's eldest son, Dmitry, who was in his late 20s when Vasily died, simply declared himself the Grand Knyaz without seeking Mongol approval. At least there's no mention that he travelled to the Horde for a Yarlik, or that the Khan's envoys placed him on the throne, as would be the normal practice. Despite this, there appears to have been no conflict, and one reason could be that in 1277, most of the knyazes, including the next eldest son of Alexander Nevsky, Andrey, was summoned by the Mongols to fight in their campaign in the Caucasus. The absence of the knyazes and their fighting men meant that the Rus enjoyed an unusually peaceful interlude. This ended abruptly in 1281. Andrey Alexandrovich headed off to pay his respects to the new Khan, Tode Möngke, and while he was there, he thought he'd ask for the Grand Knyaz's Yarlik. As I just noted, Dmitry seems to have started acting as the Grand Knyaz, without a Yarlik, which we can imagine did not impress the Mongols. And Andrey had just spent a couple of years fighting alongside them, where he could easily have had his chance to make a good impression. We lack the details as usual, but Tudamonke gave Andrey a Yarlik, and then he gave him a Mongol army to enforce it. Mikhail Ivanovich of Starodub and Fyodor Rostislavich of Rostov joined him, and they set out to lay waste to Murom, Pereyaslav, Vladimir and Suzdal, before moving on to Tver and Torzhok. The chronicle is strongly negative on Andrey, and relates the story with all the usual signifiers of disaster. Populations slaughtered or enslaved, nuns and priests' wives raped, churches and monasteries looted, the people terrorized. We have the usual concerns with how literally these reports can be taken, but the amount of space given to the tale means that we have to think this was a major Mongol incursion. Dmitry had no real options. Novgorod declined to support him, but did advise him to flee. So, in January 1282, he fled by sea to Sweden. Novgorod forces then destroyed his fortress at Goporye and sent a messenger to Vladimir, asking for the new Grand Knyaz to visit. Andrey sent the Mongol army home, made haste to Novgorod, and was installed as Knyaz. Slaughtering your way to the top with a foreign army is rarely a pathway to a secure throne. Dmitry was soon on his way back with Swedish support. His patrimonial capital of Pereyaslav welcomed him with open arms and started work on new fortifications. From across the northeast, people abandoned territories under Andrey's control and made their way to the city. Andrey, without his Mongol army, abandoned Novgorod to run back to Vladimir. Dmitry sent his own men to open negotiations with Novgorod, while Andrey made his way once again to Sarai. Tudamonke welcomed him again, and when Andrey told him that Dmitry was intending to stop paying tribute, he was given a second army, which immediately began pillaging the towns of Rus, which had barely recovered from the last time. Dmitry again stood alone against Andrey, the Mongols, and most of the other knyazes. But this time, instead of running away, he decided to exploit the fractious situation in the Horde. He went to Nogay and got his own Mongol army. This is an early example of something historians have noted in the chronicles. Although there is that ideology of silence that we've already discussed, their actions often give away that the Rus knyazes are very well informed of what's going on in the Horde, which supports the idea that they had very close relations with the Mongols. So the two brothers faced off with two rival Mongol armies. The Suzdal Chronicle strongly supports Dmitry, while the Novgorod Chronicle equally strongly supports Andrey, which gives us a rather confused picture of what happened. Andrey reacted to Dmitry's return with a Mongol army by signing a new treaty with Novgorod, under which he undertook not to surrender the city, and Novgorod said that it would not seek any other knyaz. However, this did not count for a whole lot. As we already know, the main reason that Novgorod always wanted a knyaz was that it was militarily chronically weak. Dmitry and his Mongol army soon forced Andrey to give up Novgorod, and then Vladimir and the throne. Novgorod still refused to accept Dmitry, so in early 1284, what the chronicles call all the knyazes of the whole Suzdalian land united for the first time in decades to attack Novgorod. Dmitry's Mongol army came too, and Novgorod was bludgeoned into submission. According to the Suzdalian chronicle, Dmitry followed up on his victory by sending 2 of his boyars to Kostroma, where Andrey's chief boyar, Semyon Tanilevich, had holed up. The chronicle gives this boyar a thorough going over, calling him Andrey's aide and accomplice, the instigator of sedition, the man behind recruiting the first Mongol army, probably even the commander-in-chief of the second Mongol army. Dmitry's men torture him to make him confess to raising the Khan of the Horde and leading the Tatars against our master, the Grand Knyaz Dmitry Alexandrovich. Semyon only tells them to take it up with Andrey, and so they put him to death. Andrey is enraged by this murder and heads straight to the Horde to recruit a third Mongol army. They start their invasion in the same manner as the previous 2 times, but for once Dmitry manages to get the rest of the knyazes to join him, and they succeed in driving them out. After the failure of Andrey's third attempt to seize power, we finally get 8 years of peace. Dmitry consolidates his authority, including marrying his son to the daughter of the Knyaz of Rostov. There is a minor conflict with Tver, but it was swiftly resolved when Dmitry showed that the rest of the knyazes were with him. It looked like the northeast was settling down, and when Nogay and Monkey Timur's son Toktor got together to remove Tulabuga, it looked like he had a patron among the Mongols as well. However, the Mongol situation was not yet resolved, so let's hop back and cover what's been going on from their side. So, as noted last time, the economic boom under Berke and Monkey Timur led to the emergence of new power centres, or in some cases made lesser power centres more important. The Blue Horde was a clear example. As a result of the wars with the Ilkhanids and Kaidu, Monkey Timur had worked hard to persuade merchants to choose more northerly routes than the traditional Silk Road networks. He was helped by Kaidu's wars with Kubilai and the Chagatayeds, which made the shortest route through Kaidu's territory unsafe. The Siberian road went around the hotspots, from the Caspian steppe to the Bashkir lands in the Urals, to Karakorum and then to China. The rapid rise in the flow of goods made Konichi, Khan of the Blue Horde, which, if you remember, controlled the eastern part of the Horde's territory, suddenly much richer and more important. As long as Monkey Timur ruled, this did not matter. Konichi followed the Blue Horde's traditional policy of deference to the leader of the Batuids. But then, in 1282, Monkey Timur died, and Konichi in the east and Nogay in the west started feeling less deferential. Becoming Khan was out of the question for either, as they were not Batuids. Placing a puppet on the throne, though, that was a different matter. Nogay persuaded the Begs to support Todemonke, a man with the requisite Batuid bloodline, but with no interest or talent for governing. You'll also recall that, thanks to its central geographical position, the Blue Horde played a significant role in intra-Mongol diplomacy. Knyazes decided that the Georgids needed to realign with the Toluids. He was geographically closer to Kubilai and had more to gain, and he did not share a border with the Ilkhanids, so he did not see them as a threat. In 1283, he called a Kurultai and proposed restoring relations with the Toluids. The proposal was accepted. Kubilai's son, Nomul Khan, a hostage of the Horde for 8 years, was released and sent home as a gesture of goodwill. Soon more wealth was flowing from Kubilai to Konychi. The point here is not that Konychi acted against the Horde. He didn't. But he had turned the tables. Instead of the Ordaids doing what the Batuids told them, he was now the one setting policy. While Konychi wanted greater prosperity and security for his own horde, something we've already seen contributing to the breakup of the Great Mongol Empire, Nogay wanted to rule. Nogay had become the Horde's preeminent commander under Berke, with whom he had been personally close. He had been successful and had a daunting reputation among Mongols and non-Mongols alike. Like Konychi, Nogay had benefited from his territory's key position on the trade routes, but while he got wealthier, his status went down. When the Kurultai that acclaimed Monkey Timur decided that from now on only Batuids would become Khan, he was pushed down the ranks behind a whole bunch of Monkey Timur's brothers, sons and nephews, and while he had been personally close to Berke, he did not have the same relationship with Monkey Timur. Nogay tried to recover influence through building his own alliance with the Mamluks. He tried to approach Baibars, citing his own conversion to Islam and friendship with Berke, and offering to fight the Mamluks' enemies. This did not work. Baibars was unsure what Nogay's standing was to make deals, and if you recall a couple of episodes back, the Mamluks' enemies were the Ilkhans, and the Horde was no longer at war with them. And while he was sending messengers to Baibars, Nogay was also sending his wife to Abaka to negotiate a marriage between their son and the Ilkhan's daughter. So Baibars kept his distance until the 1280s. By the 1280s, the Blue Horde was at peace, and the Batuids had ended their long-running war with the Ilkhanids. But Nogay showed little interest in peace, and more desire to return to the expansionism of 40 years previously. By supplying Dmitry with an army to defeat Andrey and his Mongol army, he made it clear that he did not regard Toremonke as being in charge. Soon he stopped waiting for the Khan's word on other matters. Nogay's control of the border regions meant that he was the first to receive intelligence. Less and less of this was shared. His territory only bordered other Mongols to the east. North, south, or west, he could see opportunities for expansion, and he was no longer interested in waiting for the Khan's approval. He raided Poland and Lithuania, demanding Rus troops accompany him. He began summoning the knyazes to his camp and telling them that they should obey him, another slight for the Khan. Tsar Georgy of Bulgaria minted coins bearing Nogay's name and used them to pay tribute. The Byzantines constantly sent him gifts to maintain his favor. In 1284, King Laszlo IV of Hungary faced a rebellion by his barons. Rather than seeking aid from his Christian partners, his own house of Angevin, or the church, Laszlo turned to Nogay, who was happy to help in exchange for Laszlo's obeisance. Todemonke had no involvement in any of Nogay's military campaigns. He was developing a reputation for having no interest in governing, and Jochid nobles began drifting to Nogay's camp. The Khan's nephew, Tolebucha, joined the Hungarian campaign. In 1287, Nogay forced Todemonke to abdicate and made Tolebucha Khan. But Tolebucha's rights were severely curtailed compared to those of his predecessors. He formerly shared power with his brother, Konchek, his nephews, Alhui and Togrilcha, and with Nogay in a ruling council. Tolebucha soon spoiled his reputation with poor military performances. He'd already messed up in Hungary, losing a large number of men and being forced to retreat out of Transylvania. In 1287 he attacked Poland, but failed to take his objective of Krakow. Once again there were significant losses, and he was forced to retreat. In 1288 he decided to attack the Ilkhanids. Again, the result was a complete failure. Nogay sent gifts to the Ilkhanid ruler, Abakaz's son Arkhun, to make it clear that the attacks were nothing to do with him. At the same time, Nogay's friendship with the Ilkhanids had limits. They were still rivals, even if they were not at war. The Pope was dealing with both the Great Horde and the Ilkhanids, and if a formal alliance with the latter arose, the Eurasian trade routes could swing back to the south. Nogay turned to the Franciscans for help. William of Rubric and Giovanni de Piana del Carpini were both Franciscans, and the order had maintained an active presence in the Horde since the Western Campaign. Franciscans travelled with the Khans, learned Mongol and Kipchak, and studied Mongol society. By 1280 they had opened permanent missions in Sarai and Kaffa, and soon after they established a mission in Nogay's capital. They made sure that they stayed in favour by acting as letter writers, secretaries, interpreters and doctors, and not charging for their services. In 1287, the Muslims of Solkhat in the Crimea destroyed the local Franciscan church. The Franciscans brought a petition for justice to the authorities. Nogay, who had been dealing with Christians for decades, and, if you recall, had been accused of adapting his religion to suit the occasion, saw a chance to win the Franciscans' loyalty. He took their side in the dispute. He dispatched one of his Muslim officials to inform the Muslims of Solkhat that they would have to build a new church and 3 bell towers, and to give the friars a substantial monetary gift. Meanwhile, his senior wife asked the Franciscans to baptize her in Crimea. Then she authorized them to build a monastery at Cherkier and told the local officials to ensure that they were protected. Nogay knew that the Mongols' relations with the Orthodox Church in the knyazes counted for nothing when he was dealing with the Catholics. So using his new Franciscan allies, he sent word to the Pope that he would like a Catholic bishop to be appointed to his territory. By the 1280s, Nogay was clearly the most powerful man in the Great Horde. He had been its primary military commander for decades and had immense prestige, while Todemonke and Tolebucha had been squandering Batuid reputation. If he was ever going to reach the top, the time had come for him to make a move. He formed a partnership with a young and ambitious son of Monke Temur, Toktua. Toktua was the son of Monke Temur's chief wife, so he should have had a strong claim. But his uncle Tolebucha and his brothers Alkhui and Tokrilcha were afraid of him and blocked him from the council. It was obvious that he would turn to Nogay, and they began working together to bring the council down. In 1291, word was sent out that Nogay was dying. He asked all the leaders of the Horde to come for a Kurultai, to lay down their arms and pledge peace with one another. Nogay was not merely the leader of his own Horde and a chief commander. He was the great-grandson of Jochi, who had known Batu and been present at the conquest of the West. His invitation could not be refused. They gathered their men and set off to the designated meeting point. Nogay welcomed them into his tent. He lay on cushions. Periodically, he spat blood. But it was not his blood. He had hidden congealed animal blood in his cheeks, and he chewed it and coughed for effect. The news that he appeared to be at death's door spread, and the begs hurried to reach the camp. Nogay, still spitting blood, welcomed them. Unarmed, according to tradition, they sat in his tent as he told tales of his 40 years of campaigning, illustrating the need for unity. The gathered begs praised his wisdom. But around the camp, Toktua and his men lay in waiting. At the agreed signal, they rushed the tent, killed Tolebucha, Tukrilcha, and all the other council members. Nothing like this had happened before, outright murder to take the throne. Toktua followed it up by marrying Tokrilcha's chief wife and taking over his family property. As we've already mentioned, it was a Mongol practice to marry a dead brother's widow, but the practice was supposed to be about protecting your brother's family. You were not supposed to murder him first. Within weeks, Toktua was recognized as Khan. He and Nogay spent the next 2 years purging Tolebucha's followers, the first political purge in the Great Horde, although Great Khan Monke had already set a precedent back in Mongolia. However, while they may have got rid of some of Toktua's rivals, he was never going to kill all the Batuids, his family after all, and the purges caused increasing resentment. This resentment targeted Nogay, not Toktua, and the Batuids brought the Khan under increasing pressure to break the old commander. In 1293 he did. How, you might ask, was this break demonstrated? Well, Nogay had overridden Todemonke 10 years earlier and used his troops to make Dmitry the Grand Knyaz of Vladimir. So Toktua did the obvious thing and sent his troops to reinstate Andrey once again. Join me next episode for the fall of Nogay and the end of an era in Suzdalia. Thank you for listening. Until next time, goodbye.